Hey everyone, welcome to Redefining HR podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schmidt, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Robin Zander. Robin is the founder and CEO of Zander Media. He is an event organizer, he's a community curator, he's a podcaster, he's an acrobat. He's a lot of things, so we're going to unpack some of that in this episode. I also do want to mention, if you've seen the intro to the Amplify Academy video, that was Robin's team's work. So we've also collaborated in video production and some of the bites and interviews that you may see in the Amplify Academy are also his team's work. So excited to sit down with him and talk about your career. So Robin, man, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Lars. It's really a pleasure. I've been a fan of the pod for many years now through mutual connections in the people landscape. And so it's a real honor to sit down with you.
Yeah, well, that's kind. And I probably didn't do your intro nearly the justice that it merits. So I'd love to have you maybe to start and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I also never know quite how to begin. I have often referred to myself as a professional dilettante. I feel like for all that I'm a strategist when it comes to in a business, how to build a business, I haven't been particularly strategic about the steps in my career. It feels like taking a step towards something I'm interested in learning and stumbling half the time. But, I've had a couple of wins along the way. So in 2016, I could probably start there. I was given ownership of an ecosystem called Responsive Org, which was all about building the future of work and what does the future of work mean. Sort of the premise of the rate of change is accelerating, which obviously we've seen to play out in the last handful of years. Then also a couple of months later, I was given an opportunity to start up a restaurant with no prior restaurant experience in the neighborhood I had lived in for 10 years in San Francisco. So 2016 to 2019, I was simultaneously running a B2B Future of Work HR business conference and a brick and mortar restaurant, cafe, and event space called Robin's Cafe. And I feel like maybe that dichotomy sums up my career pretty well, which is trying to figure out how to do things I don't know how to do on a very epically short timeline, and playing maybe equally in the dirt and sort of high level sort of curating, right? In the case of Responsive, what is the future of work look like in the best case scenario while, employing baristas and serving avocado toast and, dealing with the complexities of running a small brick and mortar business.
That's a lot to learn and a lot to learn on your own. And, it's interesting too. I think, you have other aspects from your career that even predate 2016. I understand why you started there, but, in kind of looking at your background, one of the common denominators that I find in the work that you are currently doing and the work that you've done is creativity. Right. And I mean, even taking over a brick and mortar presence, the way that you approach that and the way especially that you took that on, having never done that before, it lends itself to being able to be a problem solver, but a creative problem solver, because traditional solutions don't tend to operate in the places where you operate. And so where does that passion for creativity, where does that curiosity come from?
Yeah, it's fun. I'm still hanging in this idea of dichotomy. So my mother is a professional visual artist, and throughout my whole life has spent easily 40, 50 hours a week in her artist studio doing mezzotints and oil on canvas paintings. My dad simultaneously was running with his sister, my aunt, an environmental consulting firm, pretty much for my whole life. And the building of the business, which I kind of grew up in, helping to sort paperwork or whatever, a family business, and then seeing my mother teach art and practice her artistry, I never said, growing up, I want to be an artist or I want to be a business person, but that exposure to both, I think, has really shaped a lot of what I've done since.
Yeah. So what were you like as a kid? Let's go back. I mean, growing up in that environment where you have the kind of entrepreneurial and environmental sense from your father, the creative and artistic sense from your mother, what was young Robin all about?
Hypersensitive. And in a time and in a town where being a sensitive boy was not welcome. So I was bullied a lot as a kid. I was scared a lot as a kid. Home was safe, and going out into the world and sort of being with my peers got increasingly complex from like 3rd to 9th grade. And at the same time, I think there was an element of creativity. So my first business was Robin's Pumpkin Patch. My father, kind of at his core, is a gardener, which is how he got into environmental sciences. And so when I was 4 or 5, had me plant pumpkin seeds. 3 months later, after weeding each, plant really carefully, they started to grow pumpkins. And I, at his guidance, sold pumpkins from whatever 5 to 15 in my local neighborhood. Literally in the dirt. And then to market that with my friends, I would recruit some friends, stand on the corner of our street, dress up in a scarecrow costume, no skin showing. It looked like a big white face, eye holes, right? This for slits, straw coming out of my, my sleeves, big boots. You can't see it's a person. And when a car drove by, like gesture, right? Pointing this way, this way. And people would stop and be like, is that a robot? What's going on? Let's go look. And then they'd leave money in the tin and walk away with pumpkins for Halloween. And so it was fun, right? I've never actually thought of that before, but that creativity, my mom and I drew fancy signs advertising Robin's Pumpkin Patch in the neighborhood. So that duality too of, creatively marketing something that was like, I remember crying as my dad said, we have to weed all of these plants. And I'm like looking at 100 plants that all need to be well cared for and well watered if I wanted to sell the pumpkins.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because even that example, you're blending those worlds, right? The artistic and creative way of how do you actually garner attention to sell these pumpkins, and obviously the business sense of what you need to do to cultivate and maintain and prepare. I want to come back to a point, you mentioned kind of being a sensitive boy in an environment that wasn't built for that. And I know certainly, I think the way we think about sensitivity, particularly as men today, hopefully is very different than maybe we did in an era when we were growing up. But how did you learn to, I wouldn't even say overcome that, but adapt and survive is an extreme term and it's not the right one, but be able to kind of adapt in that environment, knowing that about yourself and knowing how that part of you wasn't received by kind of the outside world?
Yeah, that's a whole podcast episode, documentary film just there. I don't have a clean answer for you. I wish I could just point to one thing and say, oh, well, I did this and then it was fixed. And it's always a work in process, right? I had a conversation with my therapist a year ago and he was like, hey, sensitivity applied to your health means that you don't get sick because you're taking care of yourself before you get sick. And it was just like a breakthrough moment, because still there are places in my life where this idea of being very sensitive is, ties into toxicity, is I perceive it as a weakness. A bunch of moments of grace is, I think, my answer to that question. When I was in 7th grade, I was really deeply depressed. I walked around all day, every day with a black hood over my head. I didn't talk to anybody. I did okay in school, but I really just got by. And my mom saw that and she took me out of school and I homeschooled for a year. And I'd say that saved my life and really changed the trajectory of my life. At 18, I quit cross country. I'd been a runner for 10 years competitively, pretty good. And in my family growing up, you always had to have a physical practice. We didn't call it that, but you had to have a sport or something physical you did. My dad was a runner. My sister played tennis and a bunch of other things. My mom had her aerobics class. So I walked off the team, really burnt out. I'd been running for 10 years and I just couldn't deal anymore. And opened up a phone book and flipped to the G's. And I don't even remember why, but started calling gyms, gymnastics gyms. And the first 5 were all like, how old are you? Are you calling for your kid sibling? Are you pre-Olympics? No, we can't, this was whatever, the 90s, right? It wasn't acro yoga on every corner. There wasn't an accessibility to sort of novel movement that there is today. But the 6th gym, this was in Petaluma, California, was still around, called Redwood Empire Gymnastics. And they said, yeah, we have an adult class, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. Come on down. And I think it was a Tuesday night that I called them. I walked in and I just it was a life-changing moment. Again, a moment of grace, because I saw someone over there doing double back tucks on the trampoline. I saw someone over there doing giants on a high bar and said, oh, wow, this is for me. There are other moments. The cafe even was one, right? Recognizing that my sensitivity of being able to be emotionally available, be empathetic to my employees was a competitive advantage in business, right? That was a huge turning point for me with the cafe. But learning gradually and over time and through a lot of inner work that sensitivity and being self-aware is a strength and perhaps is the biggest strength.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I'm glad you learned that lesson because I agree. But I do think that we're hardwired to see it the opposite way. And it's really unfortunate because I think it causes a lot of people, and again, not to kind of gender these statements because they apply to everybody, but in particular, men, I think are taught often to not feel their emotions, not share their emotions, to suppress them, and that is toxic. And frankly, that is a leading killer because it has a lot of kind of knock-on effects when you're not able to deal with that. And so I think that's despite the hardship that you had to endure as a young boy, I think as you've grown and being able to maybe see it through a different lens and see it for the strength that it is. I'm glad that was a journey. That was the kind of where the journey led you. Discovering gymnastics at 18, that's kind of a formative time in one's life. Did you have aspiration? Like I know you were a competitive runner, so that competitive athleticism was in you. Did you envision, gymnastics would be a career? Was it a hobby? Like what role did it play in your life?
I've never been good at saying I want to go do a thing and then not dreaming about doing and striving to do the thing at the highest level. For better or for worse. So a couple of months after joining the gymnastics gym, I went and saw Alegria by Cirque du Soleil. It was my first ever real circus show. And I immediately wanted to enroll with the École Nationale de Cirque, which is the Montreal-based Cirque training school. I had already been accepted to Reed College. I was committed to myself to doing an undergrad degree, but the plan was as soon as I was done with undergrad to go audition for the École Nationale de Cirque. It's a longer story. I ended up breaking my neck on a trampoline my last year of college. And so it was a rehab from that to kind of another moment of grace and another part of my life story. But I'm in better shape today and more capable physically than I've ever been at any previous point in my life. Core to who I am is practicing movement. I tend to train about 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have a little acrobatic crew that I train with in the Bay Area. And so, I've moved past the desire to sometimes when I'm giving a talk on stage, I'll do a backflip, or I have a lot of overlap between peak performance and movement and peak performance in business. I think there's enormous commonality and what we can learn from one applied to the other. But, yeah, I don't miss performing as an acrobat. I did have a lot of opportunity to perform as an acrobat after I recovered from my neck injury. Probably my biggest was as one of 6 acrobats with the San Francisco Opera in front of thousands and thousands of people doing 6-hour acrobatic shows. It was a real honor. But yeah, movement has always been, I like to say it's always been my first language.
Yeah. It's interesting. And so, kind of following your career, you mentioned 2016 was kind of an inflection point for you as you took over Responsive, but also took over Robin's Cafe. And, I'm curious, you did that for 3 years, before starting your current business, Zander Media. Looking at, those are very different businesses, even from what you're doing now. Like if you had to go back and maybe look at the experience you gained at both Robin's Cafe and in Responsive, is there kind of a notable lesson that you learned in those endeavors that you've applied to Zander Media?
Sure, totally. Yeah, applied from the cafe and Responsive to Zander Media. I think it's a mix of what we've been talking about, the creative itch, right? The form of expression that was even that little boy, right? I haven't thought of it in years, but gesturing this way to people as they're driving by to the pumpkin patch. Right? I never published, but half wrote a cookbook while I was running the cafe just because I needed a little bit of creative itch tied into that business. And Responsive, right? We were talking very aspirationally about the future of work. And then in the cafe, I was very tactically applying those principles. The backstory for how I came to Zander Media out of those 2 businesses is I sold Robin's Cafe on Craigslist in late 2018. I I had never set out to be a restaurateur. That wasn't the aspiration. Someone gave me an opportunity to open up a second location, and I spent a couple weeks thinking about it and realized I didn't really want a second location, and ultimately didn't really want a first one. So 9 months and a bunch of lawyers later, I sold it, and woke up a couple weeks after the sale in a cold sweat and realized I'd made a mistake. And the mistake was not enough digital storytelling about what it actually takes to build a restaurant while doing it, right? Because I came in with complete naivete. I'd worked restaurants, right? My first job out of college was at a restaurant, but like I had never calculated food costs, right? I had never built a staff of employees in San Francisco, right? Who are responsible for creating an incredible experience for our customers. And if I could show you, both for my own like personal gratification and from a marketing asset for the cafe, the first time my nephew walked in and his eyes got big because I owned a soft serve machine, right? Or like one of the most sobering moments at the cafe was I had this employee named Frank who walked in, I don't know, week 3 or 5 of the cafe. He was a chef across town, totally illegal, like came behind the bar, started making food and serving our customers even before we had actually formally hired him. And a couple of weeks later, no call, no showed. Super common restaurant industry. Reached out to him. A week went by, found his brother on Facebook, and his brother called me and said, "Hey, my brother Frank was just hit and killed by a train." And how do you plan for that in a business, right? How do you build a robust people infrastructure that plans for an employee dying? Like, that's the real stuff, right? It's one thing to talk about remote and distributed work. It's another thing entirely to build a company where people love to work and love each other regardless of where they're located, right? And so for me, Zander Media was sort of an homage to like, I don't know how to do digital storytelling at scale, but there are so many compelling human stories that need to be told. There are so many people like me with the cafe building something incredible, and people want to hear those stories. And it's good for the business, right? If I had in 2016 started advertising on Insta stories, that was the first year Insta created Instagram stories, and showed little vignettes of what it actually felt like to work behind the counter, we would have crushed, right? And we did. We had 10,000 people on our newsletter list, right? Like I am a good marketer, but we could have done so much more. And so Zander Media is the rest of my life project, or a rest of my life project, to do storytelling at scale against causes that matter.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think when you use that example to a cafe, today we often talk about building in public, which is something I certainly embrace, and I think a lot of interesting kind of builders and creators out there, they adopt that, and there's so much to be gained from it. It's not just like, hey, look at this thing I'm building, but when you're building it in public with a community, in parallel, getting feedback in real time, iterating, testing ideas, right? Like that's invaluable than to just do something, have it ready to go, and then be like, hey, here's the thing I did. And usually, that thinking is applied to digital products or online products, or even experiences, but it can be applied to brick and mortar as well. And it's interesting kind of in hindsight, thinking how you would have looked maybe differently about approaching that. I know kind of we talked about creativity being in your blood. Well, so is storytelling. And I do want to talk to you about your new documentary, Parenthood at Work. But before I even get there, like looking back, and maybe this question applies more to your work at Zander Media or any of your editorial projects and books, podcasts, everything else. When you're kind of in the storytelling business, you generally, I think you have an expectation going in. It meets that expectation. Maybe it alters in some ways. Maybe it falls a bit short. But every now and then, something happens and it just blows you away. It was completely unexpected, or is
Sure.
deeply emotional and powerful, and you like weeks later you're still thinking about it, like that kind of
or
story.
years later. Yeah. So it's less a story that I helped to tell, right? All of my stories, I was thinking in preparing for sitting down with you today, like why HR, right? Like I am not an HR professional, and yet I'm friends with a lot of folks in HR, and I care passionately about the space. And so the stories that really resonate with me the most are the stories of people whose lives have changed because of positive experiences in business. And I don't mean a founder got rich because they sold their company, right? I mean, my employee Land at Robin's Cafe, I was maybe 6 or 9 months into the cafe, came in to get some mail as Land was closing. And he deliberately like stopped what he was doing and pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Robin, this is the very best job I've ever had." And he was a late 20s skater. He was an aspiring pro skater who really had only ever worked restaurant and cafe jobs, right? Barista jobs. Not quite minimum wage, just above minimum wage, but like, not guaranteed a certain number of hours, probably not, we weren't at the time able to offer healthcare benefits. Like it's not, it's a day job. It's a hustle. And that moment when he pulled me aside was just a mic drop moment for me, right? When I think about the transformation, so another person, right? Again, it's these HR stories for me. Angela, who's our head of video at Zander Media, was an unpaid video intern in the last year of Robin's Cafe. I had written a Craigslist ad saying, "Hey, I want to do some more video storytelling at the cafe. This is the thing I run." She came in, I remember, dropped her resume, pretty soon started coming in with her girlfriend and just like getting some coffee from the cafe. And we never really like cracked the code of digital storytelling while I was doing the cafe, but like we started to try. And we've been working together now, almost 5 years. She's our head of video. Like I look at the creative work that she's doing and the person that she's become. And that's not, that's a credit to her. She's done that work. And so, yeah, who do people become as a result of the quality of work, the quality of organization they get to work within? I think those are really the stories that stand out to me. And we see them everywhere, right? I see transformation in you, Lars, through running the podcast, right? Like you're better and better at telling personal stories, at soliciting and drawing out compelling answers from your guests, right? Over the last couple of years. Those are the stories that stand out to me is who is the transformation of people through the work that we do.
Well, it's kind of you to share, and I appreciate that, and I agree of just the storytelling, and like being in this position as a podcast host or a video producer, movie producer, whatever it might be, it's a privilege to be able to spotlight and share these stories. Like the work we get to do is yes, it's personally deeply meaningful, and I think when we're able to really bring those meaningful stories out. It's deeply meaningful for the guest and the audience. But I know that, I imagine you do as well. I know I take a lot from it. I learn a lot from it. I'm inspired by hearing those stories and whether it's, overcoming adversity, whether it's just thinking differently about a problem that, everybody else is coming at it this way and you come at it this way and discover some amazing things, failing spectacularly, right? And what you learn from that, I just think it's just, it's such a privilege to be able to be trusted with those stories and to be able to kind of share them and experience them. And that, is a great segue into your latest project. So your new film, Parenthood at Work, debuts this month. So congratulations. I know that's a huge accomplishment. But tell me more about it. Like where did the idea for this film come from?
Yeah. So Responsive Conference 2019, we hosted the conference at Zappos. There's a backstory there. Tony Hsieh, rest in peace, attended my year one conference in 2016, turned around, invited me to kind of tour Zappos and get to know his ecosystem. And then, through his entourage, invited us to run the conference at Zappos HQ in 2019. And one of the topics, right? My goal always in curating Responsive has been where are we going, right? Not what is, Forbes and Business Insider and right, the zeitgeist talking about right now, but what are we not talking about that we should be? And so like I interviewed Joel Gascoigne, the CEO of Buffer, on stage in 2016, talking about, building a remote and distributed company. Like where are we headed? And in 2019, one of the conversations that I was hearing along, the people leader lines was parenthood. And what does it mean to be a working parent or a working caregiver? And in many ways, those are, less public, right? We don't see them, but they impact, right? I'm not yet a parent. You are, right? Like, really concretely what that means and how to balance and what those trade-offs are. And so flash forward February 2020, we made the difficult decision to pause Responsive Conference because of the COVID pandemic and said, well, we run a video company. What if we took the same energy and really focused on a specific topic of the future of work? What's that topic? And sort of as a creative team, right, Jonathan, who is the writer and the director of the documentary episode on parenthood and work, said, hey, I'm a working parent. What if we interview a lot of working parents who are HR professionals we know through the responsive ecosystem and tell their story? We as a team had never done a documentary before. In the first year, none of the interviews we did were in person, right? So all of them were remote. We did them via Zoom, via a complicated like digital setup, but all shot on like very, 4K, very high definition. So Jonathan was at home with one camera on him in Austin, and Merritt Anderson was in San Jose, California with another camera on her. And we, did the whole thing. Huge labor of love and a really, really compelling story. And I'm just thrilled with how that episode has turned out.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think when you get into an editorial project like that, you probably have some preconceived ideas of how it will go, how it will flow, what you will learn. And in some ways you track with that. And in other ways you're like, oh, wow, like this wasn't even on my mind. And yet this is a theme that is coming across. Was there anything like that for you in the production of this movie, where maybe, something that maybe wasn't on your radar going in, but as through the course of the interviews you filmed and the stories that were shared, something that really resonated with you by the end?
I think of some of the best interviewers in the world, and one of the people who comes to mind is Terry Gross. And the idea that I've heard Terry articulate of helping people to feel so comfortable that they're not secrets, but truths that are maybe less told come out. And so I think one of the strategic advantages that we as Zander Media have always held is, first of all, working with great people, right, in terms of our clients or in terms of the folks that we're interviewing and have the privilege to sit down with, and then creating a culture internal to Zander Media, at least, I strive to, where our clients are asking after my employees, right, where it's not just cogs in a machine conducting interviews and turning it into something, but creating a level of safety and trust and camaraderie and love. We don't talk enough, I think, about love at work, where there is bond, where there is kindness, and that really elicits the best stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think that environment and that Terry Gross reference is spot on, because if you don't have that level of comfort, you're going to have your guard up to some extent, and you're not going to be able to go to the places that I think really shine a light. And the topic of parenthood at work, I mean, for those of you that are watching and your parents, like, that this has been a complex roller coaster, especially, I mean, parenting can be hard under the best circumstances. And we've not been operating under the best circumstances for a couple of years now. And then that's, it's hard. It's the hardest job, you'll have as a human. It can be the most rewarding, but it can also be the most difficult. Right. And I think that reality is something that, there are some topics where you tend to often hear like the shinier side of the topic and not the more difficult side of the topic. You can apply that to HR and talk about employer branding, right? Like, we're great at selling the sizzle. We're not often great at, sharing the warts and the bullshit that we have to deal with, and every job has it, right? But that's just not typically part of that equation. It should be, but it's not. And I think storytelling has a lot of analogies in that too, where if you don't have that level of trust and comfort, you may not be able to get to some of that really meaty, interesting stuff that I think tells such a more kind of holistic view of the role. For the audience who wants to watch the documentary, where can they find it? How can they check it out?
Yep. So anywhere I am on social, which is pretty much everywhere, it'll be linked to. So Robin P. Zander, Zander on social. It's also linked to from responsive.org. That's responsive.org. It's also linked to from the Zander Media website. And so anywhere, if you want to just Google Parenthood at work, Zander Media, it'll also pop up.
Okay, well, I'm excited. I saw it. It's great. You should definitely watch it. And again, I think whether you're a parent or not, if you're in HR, you will have employees who are. And so kind of just understanding that experience it will be valuable for you as a practitioner. What's next for you, right? I feel like you're always building something. You're always creating. This has been a huge labor of love that is out now, and I know there's marketing and promotion events associated with that. But setting this documentary aside for a moment, what's on your radar? What's next?
Yeah, I mean, I think of myself as firefighter in chief at Zander Media. There's always whatever that is, right? Whatever it is we're building. So, I've been blessed to run this organization, but also there's been plenty of struggles, HR and otherwise, over the last year. We've, quadrupled in size, both in headcount and in revenue in the last 12 months. And now we're looking at a looming recession, and I'm sort of trying to plan for that. We're bootstrapped, right? No outside funding. So it's really just like figuring it out. And the quality of my creative team has continued to evolve. The documentary as an example of like, we could not have done that 5 years ago, right? I couldn't have led it. The team couldn't have done it. And so we're just continuing to iterate, really using my team to say, like, what do we want to be doing, right? What is the future of Responsive Conference, which will come back in some form in 2023, right? We'll probably do more episodes on related topics, outside of parenthood, but tied into the future of work. And then my own personal brand, I'm always creating. That's really part of where Zander Media came from too, is like, what are the stories that I want to tell? And that's soul searching. That's sitting down with myself and saying, like, given the constraints, good and bad, right? Like time, energy, money, etc. What are the stories that I myself feel called to tell that I don't see other people doing? And so that's I think what this fall is for me. We're so delighted to, I think all of us, see the documentary out in the world, continue the client work that Zander Media is known for, and ask ourselves the question, what's next?
Well, Robin, I'm excited to follow what's next as you continue down that path and that journey. It's been exciting to learn more about your background and your career. And congrats again on the documentary and all of your work. And keep pushing, man. I love following your work and seeing what you build. So happy to keep tracking that. And be excited to see whatever you create next.
Thank you, Lars. And just a shout back to you in terms of people telling stories that matter. It's been just an honor to follow your journey and, get to know you through shared ecosystems and your podcast. The stories that you're highlighting, right? It's the work that matters too. So thanks for the work that you do.
Yeah, well, that's kind of you. Thank you. And I'm excited to see what's to come.
Talk soon.